right, guys, a few weeks ago, I had a post on our community page, and I was asking what type of videos you'd like to see on our channel in the future. At least stuff that I also have some knowledge about or I have some interest in. And really the most requested topic by a mile was coverage of the bills here in Massachusetts. So over the last few weeks, I've been digging through those archives, researching, so on and so forth. And one thing I want to tell you is how ridiculous it is on why some bills pass and some bills do not. So the first bill I want to cover here today is called the Medical Civil Rights Act, okay? And this bill has essentially the power to change lives and save them, protect our communities, and limit litigation risks, which would in turn reduce the costs that you guys, the taxpayers, face. Now, I think before I tell you what this bill is or what it stands for, I want to put you in a position, okay? So imagine this for a second, all right? You're driving home from work, and let's say you're not feeling that well. You're not feeling good for whatever reason. You're swerving, and you're having some kind of medical issue behind the wheel, okay? Then a police officer approaches your car, but instead of immediately calling for medical services or medical help, they're unsure if it's an actual emergency. So now your life basically hinges not on some levels of medical expertise, but on a split-second judgment made by somebody without medical training, okay? And in its simplest form, a question like, do you need emergency medical services, would resolve that issue really immediately, okay? And guys, this isn't something that's a hypothetical scenario, okay? It's not hypothetical at all. As a matter of fact, it's a reality that millions of Americans face. They face this every single year, okay? They face it every single year. Now, before I get into the bill, I want to explain some of the back-end data on why that I think this is important, okay? So each year, around 60 million people in the United States have contact with some levels of law enforcement, okay? And up to 10 million are interactions with correctional officers. Now, out of those two numbers, there's roughly around 7,000 people that die in custody annually, and really many of these deaths could be potentially avoided with timely medical intervention, okay? Now, here's the crazy thing. The United States as a whole, they spend over $3 billion annually on the settlements that are related to some levels of misconduct or custodial deaths, all right? Now, where do you think the majority of that money is coming from? It's coming from you guys, right? It's coming from you. So if you look at the data from Massachusetts alone, we've paid millions upon millions of dollars in settlements due to avoidable deaths. And here's the other thing, okay? Police-involved deaths more than tripled, to my understanding, between 2020 and 2022 in the state alone, in Massachusetts alone, all right? So if you take a look at a state like Connecticut, for example, they paid out around $45 million, and you could look this case up, by the way. This was a Randy Cox case, and that was $45 million alone for that case. So not only could have his life been saved, potentially, but it also could have been avoided, these costs, by simply calling EMS, Emergency Medical Services. So the main issue is that there is no legal requirement in most states, all right, for officers to summon medical help during a crisis, unless it involves obvious injuries, okay? Now, there are constitutional protections under the 8th and the 14th Amendment, but they only cover those already in custody. So basically, there is this like dangerous gap during a pre-arrest encounter for something as simple as a traffic stop or something like a traffic stop. All right. So I can explain a little bit how this works because it's really straightforward and it's very, very simple. Okay. It requires law enforcement officers to immediately request emergency medical services if a person is in the position that they communicate that they're experiencing some levels of a medical emergency, or the person to some extent seems to be in medical distress. Now, at this point, you may be thinking the exact same thing I was, which was this, okay? Isn't this something that is like, don't we already have something like this? And the fact is that we don't, right? Officers aren't trained in medicine or trained to recognize these signs, nor should they be, okay? So guess what? I asked the same questions, all right? I went even further than looking at the bills, and this is how it goes, all right? Officers will not need to diagnose or make medical judgments. They simply need to call for professional help. And what this would do, this would essentially remove the burden from law enforcement and places the medical decisions where they belong, which is with the healthcare professionals, okay? Now, someone basically says that they need medical attention and they're summoned. Simple as that. The person in distress that asks for help also has to foot that bill. That was also one of my questions. So if you request medical attention, if you get pulled over, whatever it is, and you're having a legitimate problem, if EMS services are called, that is going to be on the person that requested them to be called. Okay. So also, again, from what I've been reading, there is a lot of people that are in support of this, not just like civilians to some extent. I'm talking about doctors, legal experts like judges that are trying to secure this basic right for all Americans. And that right is to emergency medical care during any law enforcement interaction. It's simple as that, all right? Now, the way I see it, this bill would aim to create clear, enforceable guidelines that prioritize mainly three things, okay? Number one is your life. Number two is to limit or even end litigation of or against law enforcement. And number three, it would in turn, without that litigation, save taxpayers billions of dollars every single year. Now, you also may be thinking the same thing I did when I read this. I'm sitting here thinking, you mean to tell me if I'm having an issue and I'm driving somewhere, swerving on the road or whatever it may be, a cop pulls me over and asks what's wrong. If I tell them that I need emergency medical services, there's no obligation that they actually have to provide that. And that was something that was really irking me. Okay, it was really bothering me. And I find it ridiculous that this isn't something that's common practice in the first place. At least that's at least what I felt. And that's essentially where my mind went. I just couldn't believe that these are the circumstances that we're in here in 2025. So it goes like this. If the bill passed, Americans would have immediate medical attention that can prevent these deaths from like strokes or heart attacks, overdoses, and, you know, some other emergencies too, right? So officers would have clear, simple guidelines that reduce liability and stress as well, okay? Because, again, they aren't equipped to make medical decisions. So fewer lawsuits would mean fewer expenses for the taxpayers and also potentially fewer deaths. Now, again, Connecticut they've already implemented this. And one of my concerns was like, how is this going to be costly, right? But they issued a $0 fiscal note for implementing the act. So that basically means there's no cost to the taxpayers, $0 for this to be implemented. And honestly, in my opinion, you know, I think communities will have, like, this is what would eventually happen. I think communities would have a greater confidence in law enforcement when there are safeguards for their health and well-being, okay? Now, of course, here's where Massachusetts steps in and is Massachusetts. This bill has been stalled at the State House. Why? Right? Why? It has the support of police officers. It has the support of doctors and judges. It has the support of correctional officers. It has the support of emergency medical services, attorneys, so on and so forth. So I think that there's overwhelming evidence of a bill like this, that it should be a necessity for the citizens of America, okay? And really, this is not a partisan issue, right? It's a human issue, okay? So this act isn't about assigning blame or anything like that. It's about preventing tragedy when you boil this down, right? So imagine if officers had been required by law to act, removing any doubt or levels of hesitation. There would be a lot of people still alive today. And you know, we can't change the past, of course, right? But we can at the very least honor it by building some levels of a better future. And that's really why I wanted to cover this bill. I think it is very important. And I think that stuff like this could be, you know, a life-changing bill. And this extends, again, beyond just Massachusetts. They want this bill to pass across the country. And in turn, this would benefit the police officers, correctional officers, civilians, the citizens of the United States. It would save lives. It saves money. And ultimately, I think it would restore some of the faith that we have in our law enforcement. All right. I'm going to do a few more videos on this as I get more and more and more data. And just to provide you with some clarity of what is happening on the back end, if you're interested, you know, in that sort of thing. And I'm also going to leave a few links down below. If you want to read up on, you know, I went over this bill pretty thoroughly here, I think. But if you want to read it verbatim, which I didn't feel like doing on the screen today, if you want to read it verbatim, you can. And if this is something that you support, you know, get involved, right? Call your local lawmakers and stand up for your rights, okay? Let's see if we can make some actual changes. It's one thing to talk about the changes. It's another thing to act on those changes, right? And that's what I think we're trying to create here. So that's it for today's video, guys. Again, the links will be in the description below. I'll see you on the next video.